You know, sometimes life doesn't break you all at once. It does it in quiet ways with folded papers, soft voices, and sterile hospital walls. I remember that day so clearly. The beeping of machines, the faint scent of antiseptic, and the dull ache in my chest that wasn't just from the surgery. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name yet. The nurse had just adjusted my IV when a man from the delivery department walked in, holding a brown envelope. My name was written in my husband's handwriting. For a second, my heart lifted, because even though we'd been distant for months, I thought maybe, just maybe, he was reaching out. But the nurse gave me a strange look, and the man said, "It's from your husband." He said, "It's urgent." Oh, urgent. That word felt heavier than the oxygen mask pressed against my face. I reached out, my hand trembling, still weak from the operation. My fingers brushed against the paper. It was cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you realize something terrible is about to happen. When I tore the envelope open, I didn't even understand what I was looking at first. Legal words, typed lines, the stamp of a lawyer's office. And then, that one sentence. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I didn't even cry at first. I just stared. My mind couldn't connect the dots. I read it again and again, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from the medication. But it was real. My husband, the man who once held my hand through storms, who promised to grow old with me, had sent me divorce papers. To my hospital bed. I remember the nurse trying to comfort me, asking if I wanted her to call someone. I just shook my head. Because how could I explain that the only person I wanted to see was the one who had just walked away in the cruelest way imaginable? The irony wasn't lost on me. I was lying in that hospital bed because of him. He'd been too busy to pick me up that day. Too distracted, he said. So I drove myself to the doctor, even though I wasn't feeling well. And somewhere between the red lights and the rain, my world went black. When I woke up, I was in that white room, bruised, broken, but alive. Alive enough for him to leave me. I had always imagined heartbreak as something loud, screaming, slamming doors, tears flooding your pillow. But mine came in silence. In the sound of papers sliding across a metal tray. In the hum of hospital lights that never turned off. For a long time I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, not because I was angry, but because I couldn't believe the man I loved had turned into someone capable of this. You see, we weren't perfect. Our marriage had its cracks, late nights at work, unspoken words, arguments that ended in cold shoulders. But I thought that's what every marriage went through. I thought we'd find our way back, we always did before. But now, I wasn't sure there was a way back from this. The next morning, I asked the nurse to bring me a mirror. She hesitated, maybe thinking I shouldn't see myself yet. But I insisted. When I looked into that glass, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale skin, swollen eyes, a faint scar along my cheek. And yet, the most painful thing wasn't what I saw, it was what I felt. Emptiness. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart, it steals your reflection. You start to question who you are, what you did wrong, why you weren't enough. I remember whispering to myself, why now? Why here? As if the hospital walls could answer me. Maybe he thought I'd be too weak to fight back. Maybe he wanted a clean break, while I was lying there, too broken to argue. Or maybe he just stopped loving me long before this day, and this was his way of finally admitting it. I didn't see him for the first 3 days after that envelope arrived. He didn't call, didn't text, and every time the door opened, I hoped, foolishly, it would be him. Instead, it was the same nurse, the same doctor, the same empty hallway. Until one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he finally walked in. He looked different, colder, distant, like a stranger wearing my husband's face. I wanted to ask him why. Why now? Why this way? Why he couldn't even wait until I was home, until I could at least stand on my own 2 feet. But before I could speak, he said it. It's better this way. Those words still echo in my head sometimes. It's better this way. Better for who? Certainly not for the woman hooked to IV lines, whose heart was still beating for him, even after he had given up. He didn't stay long, just a few minutes. He talked about how things hadn't been working for a while, how he needed to move on, how I'd understand. I didn't say a word, because if I had opened my mouth, I would have screamed. After he left, I finally let myself cry, quietly, into my pillow, not because I wanted him back, but because I couldn't believe the person I had built my life around could be so cruel, so detached. It felt like dying twice, once on that rainy road, and again when he handed me those papers. But you know what's strange? In that pain, something inside me started to shift. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe it was the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Strength. Because as I lay there wiping away my tears, I realized something powerful. If he could walk away from me at my weakest, then maybe I didn't need him at all when I finally stood strong again. That was the night I made myself a promise. Not to forgive him, not to forget, but to rise, to get up from that hospital bed one day, not just as the woman he left, but as the woman who survived. And so I started small, breathing exercises, therapy sessions, letters I wrote but never sent. I told myself if I can endure this, I can endure anything. Because sometimes, life has to break you open completely before it shows you who you really are. And I was about to find out. The morning after he left, the hospital felt colder. Not because of the temperature, but because something inside me had shifted. I woke up before dawn, long before the nurses began their rounds. The pale light through the blinds painted thin stripes across my bed, and for a brief second, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. That I would look to my side and see his jacket draped over the chair, his coffee cup half full, waiting for me to wake up. But the chair was empty, just the envelope on the tray. Still there, like a cruel reminder that some wounds don't bleed. They sign legal documents. I tried to close my eyes again, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts were louder than any machine around me. I kept wondering, was he already gone from our house? Had he packed up his things? Had he told people? That last question hurt the most, because in my heart I already knew the answer. By mid-morning the whispers began. Hospitals have a way of turning into small towns. Nurses talk, visitors glance, secrets spread through walls. One of the young aides, thinking I was asleep, whispered to another, "She's the one whose husband sent divorce papers here, right?" Right there. That sentence. It pierced deeper than any scalpel. I wanted to disappear under the blanket. Because it wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was humiliation. I used to be proud of my marriage. We weren't the richest couple, or the most glamorous, but we had history. We'd built everything together. Our first home, our small business, our routines that only we understood. Every inch of that life had been carved out with love and sacrifice. And now, I had become a hospital roomer. A sad story told during coffee breaks. That afternoon my sister came to visit. Her face was pale, her eyes red, not from tears, but from trying not to cry in front of me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, gripping my hand. "As if I even knew," I wanted to say. When I showed her the envelope, her expression changed. Not just sadness but anger. Pure, burning anger. "How could he?" she hissed. "You're lying here because of stress, exhaustion." And he adds this. But I didn't have the energy to defend him, or to hate him. I just felt tired. You know, that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't always come with rage. Sometimes it just leaves you empty, staring at walls, wondering when your life became a stranger's story. As days passed, the physical pain started to fade. But the emotional pain, that stayed. It sat beside me like an invisible visitor, whispering all the questions I didn't want to ask. And one question kept haunting me: was there someone else? I didn't want to believe it. I had always thought we were the kind of couple who could survive anything. But sometimes, silence answers louder than words. He hadn't visited again. Not a single call. Not even a message asking if I was healing. And when silence replaces concern, that's when you know love has already packed its bags. One evening, when most of the lights were dimmed and the halls had quieted down, a nurse named Angela came in to check my vitals. She was kind, soft-spoken. One of those women who could sense pain even when you pretended to smile. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I shouldn't say this, but I saw your husband downstairs the day you were admitted." I froze. My heart thudded. "You did?" She nodded. "He wasn't alone." The air around me seemed to thicken. "He was with a woman," she said carefully. "You were being rushed into the ER, and he was outside, talking to her." It looked serious. Serious. That one word replayed in my head like an echo in an empty church. Angela touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry, honey, I thought maybe it was just a friend." But now, after what he did, I turned my face away. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I finally did. And believing meant accepting that the man I'd built my whole world around had already replaced me, before I even knew we were breaking. The next morning, I asked my sister to bring my phone. I hadn't touched it in days. When she handed it to me, it felt like a brick. Heavy with messages, missed calls, and memories. There were texts from friends, coworkers, even some clients. But none from him. Not one. I scrolled through old messages. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up. We'll talk later." So many laters that never came. And then I saw it. A message from an unknown number, sent just days before my accident. "She'll find out soon. You need to tell her before someone else does." My chest tightened. The text was sent to him. He must have deleted the rest, but somehow, this one had backed up to our shared drive. The cloud that we both used and forgot existed. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. I understood what it meant. There was someone else, and he'd been planning his escape long before those papers ever arrived. For a long time, I stared at that message. The words blurring through tears I didn't even realize were falling. It's funny how your mind goes numb when your heart shatters. All I could think was how long had I been living a lie? Was every "I love you" just an echo? Was every kiss a curtain before betrayal? I wanted to throw the phone, to scream, to rage, but I couldn't. The IV line in my arm, the weakness in my body, the hospital walls, they all reminded me I wasn't strong enough yet. But I would be. I promised myself I would be. That night I wrote in my journal. It was something my therapist had recommended before, writing as a way to heal. But this time it wasn't for therapy. It was for survival. I wrote, "He left when I needed him most, but I will rise when he expects me least." Those words became my prayer, my anchor, my weapon. Because if he had chosen to abandon me when I was at my weakest, then I would make sure that one day he would see me at my strongest. In the days that followed, I began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. I asked the doctors when I could be discharged. I told my sister not to contact him again. And when the papers sat beside my bed, staring back at me like ghosts, I finally decided something: I would sign them. Not because he deserved closure, but because I did. Letting go wasn't surrender. It was strength. It was me saying, "You cannot destroy me. Not like this." On the day of my discharge, I looked around that hospital room one last time. Those walls had seen me at my worst, my tears, my silence, my breaking point. But they had also witnessed something beautiful: rebirth. As the nurse wheeled me out, the brown envelope rested on my lap. The same one that had once felt like a death sentence now felt lighter, because it no longer carried his decision. It carried mine. When I reached the exit, the same door where I had first been brought in on a stretcher, I whispered to myself, "This is where my old life ends, and my new one begins." But life, of course, isn't that simple. The day I went home, I learned something that would reopen every wound I'd just begun to close. Something that would make me question everything again. Every memory, every smile, every night we spent together. Because betrayal, I learned, has layers, and I hadn't even peeled back the first one yet. There's a saying my mother used to whisper when I was little: "Truth doesn't knock, it breaks the door." And that week, truth didn't just break my door. It shattered it. I had just returned home from the hospital, walking through rooms that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too empty. The smell of disinfectant still clung to my skin, and the faint marks from IV needles hadn't faded. But the deeper wounds, the ones inside my chest, were nowhere near healing. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was how clean everything was. Too clean. The kind of clean that doesn't happen naturally, not unless someone's trying to erase the traces of a person. The photos were still on the wall, the cushions still fluffed, but something was missing, something invisible. The warmth, the us. He'd taken half the furniture, half the clothes, and, as I'd soon realize, all of the love that had once filled this house. My sister stayed with me that night. She cooked soup, made tea, tried to talk about anything except him. But when she went to bed, I found myself wandering through the house, touching old things, tracing my fingers along the edges of our memories. That's when I noticed it. His laptop. It sat on the desk, still plugged in. Maybe he'd forgotten it in his hurry. Maybe it was intentional, part of his cruel closure. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Part of me didn't want to look. But the other part, the broken, desperate, aching part, needed answers. When I opened the screen, the password box appeared. I typed it in, almost instinctively. The same password he'd always used, the date of our wedding. And just like that, it unlocked emails, messages, a digital trail of his betrayal. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was business. Maybe it was harmless. But when I clicked on one of the messages, my entire body went cold. Subject: "Can't believe she doesn't know. You have to tell her, David. I can't keep pretending to be your colleague when everyone already suspects. She deserves the truth before it comes out some other way." I froze. The sender's name glared back at me in bold letters. Clara, my best friend. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. The words blurred. The world tilted. Clara, the woman who had been my maid of honor. The woman who had held my hand when I lost my mother. The woman who had driven me to the hospital the first time I fainted from stress. The same stress that came from trying to keep my marriage together. Her. No, it couldn't be. I scrolled down, desperate, trembling, and there it was. Weeks of messages, some hidden, some deleted, some tucked away in archived folders he thought I'd never see. Words that burned through me like fire. "She's so trusting, it makes me feel guilty sometimes. You said you'd tell her after the project ended. She's your wife, David. I don't want to be the secret anymore." Every sentence was a knife. Every timestamp, a lie I had once believed. I remembered the late nights he said he was working on, reports, the business dinners that never made it onto his calendar. The weekends Clara said she was out of town, but somehow didn't post a single picture. The puzzle pieces fit together now, perfectly, cruelly. I don't remember how long I sat there, reading. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and my heartbeat pounding in my ears. At one point, I realized I was whispering aloud, "Clara? You," as if saying her name might make it less real. But it was real. Too real. I scrolled until I reached the final message, the one that explained everything. From Clara, "She's being admitted tomorrow. I told you. You can't keep living two lives. If you're gonna end it, do it cleanly. Don't drag it out." The timestamp was the night before my accident. She knew. She knew I was being hospitalized. She knew he was planning to end it. And instead of telling me, she encouraged him to send divorce papers to my hospital bed. For a long time, I couldn't move. My hands just lay limp on the keyboard, my breath uneven. The betrayal wasn't just from my husband anymore. It was from someone who knew me deeply, who knew my weaknesses, my history, my heart. Clara wasn't just another woman. She had been my safe place, and she used that trust like a weapon. When my sister woke up the next morning, she found me still sitting there, eyes swollen, face pale. I didn't need to explain. One look at the laptop screen and she understood. She wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "He doesn't deserve your tears, and she doesn't deserve your silence." But I couldn't even find anger yet. I was too numb, because anger requires strength, and I was still somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief. Later that day, Clara called. Her name flashed on my phone like poison. My hand shook as I answered. "Hello," my voice came out hollow. "Hey," she said, pretending to sound casual. "I heard you're back home. I was just gonna stop by." "Don't." That single word stopped her. There was a long pause, then a nervous laugh. "Why not? I wanted to." "I know, Clara." Silence. Not the kind of silence filled with confusion, but guilt, heavy, suffocating guilt. Her voice dropped. You looked through his laptop." I looked at the truth. I whispered, "Something you both forgot how to tell." There was a shaky breath on the other end. Then, softly, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I closed my eyes. "It never is." She started crying, soft at first, then harder. "I loved him," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. We tried to stop, but you didn't." I cut in. My voice cracked, but my resolve didn't. "You watched me fight for that marriage. You heard me cry over his distance. And you said nothing. You smiled in my face and stood beside him behind my back." Her sobs grew louder. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I said, my tone sharp for the first time. "That the man I loved used my hospital bed as his excuse to be with you. That while I was fighting for my life, you were fighting for my husband." There was silence. Just silence. And then, quietly, I said, "Don't call again." I ended the call, and this time I didn't cry. Not one tear. Because some pain dries you out completely. That night I sat by the window staring at the streetlights flickering below. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I finally had the truth. The truth may break you, but lies keep you bleeding, and I was done bleeding. I looked at that brown envelope on the table, the same one that had haunted me since the hospital. I picked up a pen, and with steady hands, I signed the papers. Then I whispered to myself, "You didn't end my story. You just gave me a new beginning." But what I didn't know was that fate wasn't done with me yet. Because a week later, an unexpected visitor would arrive at my door. Someone who would tell me that my husband's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was criminal. It had been exactly a week since I signed the divorce papers. A week since I'd told myself that everything was over. That I could finally start healing, finally start breathing again. But grief, I've learned, doesn't move in straight lines. Just when you think you've reached acceptance, it circles back with new questions, new wounds, new truths. That morning, I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world outside move on without me. People walking their dogs, cars humming past, laughter echoing from children at the park. It all looked so normal, and I wondered if I would ever feel normal again. The doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was my sister. She often came by unannounced, making sure I was eating, sleeping, and not drowning in silence. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was a man in a dark gray suit. Mid-40s, sharp features, a calm but serious expression. "Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, his voice professional but gentle. "Yes," I said slowly. He reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. "Detective Marcus Hale, Financial Crimes Division." My stomach tightened. "Detective," two words that can either bring relief or ruin. "May I come in?" he asked politely. I hesitated for a moment, my mind spinning through a dozen possibilities, then nodded and stepped aside. He walked in carefully, glancing around as though observing more than just the room. "I understand this might be difficult," he began, "but I need to ask you a few questions about your husband, David Lawson." Just hearing his name still made my chest ache. But I forced myself to sit down, folding my trembling hands together. "Go ahead," I whispered. He nodded and took a seat across from me. Your husband has been under preliminary investigation for several months, he said slowly, watching my reaction. It concerns some irregularities in his company's accounts, money being transferred under false identities. I blinked, trying to process. What kind of irregularities? Embezzlement, he said plainly. Large sums, nearly $500,000 missing from investor funds. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. David, I managed. No, there must be a mistake. He runs that firm with such. He cut me off gently. We have reason to believe he used your name on several of the shell accounts. The words hit me like a physical blow. Me, my name? Yes, he said quietly. Some of the withdrawals were linked to joint accounts, tax records, and your hospital insurance claim. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Hospital insurance claim, my accident, the timing, the urgency of those papers, it all began to make sense. Horrifying, undeniable sense. Detective, I whispered, are you saying that he used me to cover his crimes? He gave a small, sympathetic nod. That's what it looks like. I felt sick, literally sick. I got up and walked to the window, trying to steady myself. All those years I trusted him with everything. The bills, the taxes, the company paperwork. Because he said, you don't need to worry about that, honey. I'll take care of it. And now I realized he had taken care of it. For himself, using me as the shield. The hospital, the divorce, the silence. He wasn't just leaving me, he was protecting himself. That's why the papers came when they did, when I was too weak to question anything. He wanted me to sign, to separate legally, before the truth came out. Because if I was still his wife, I could testify. But if I was his ex, I'd be legally limited. I turned back to Detective Hale, my voice shaking. Does Clara know? He sighed softly. We're aware of her involvement, yes. She's been questioned. She claims she didn't know about the money. Just the affair. Of course she did. Cowards always claim half the truth. The detective hesitated, then added, there's one more thing. The night of your accident, do you recall what happened? I closed my eyes. The memory was hazy, like a fog I'd never been able to walk through. I was driving to the clinic. It was raining. I remember headlights. And then nothing. He leaned forward slightly. We pulled surveillance footage from a nearby traffic camera. There was another car that followed you from your neighborhood to the intersection where you crashed. I frowned. Another car. He nodded. A black BMW, registered to your husband's company. For a few seconds, I just stared at him. Then the room began to tilt. Are you saying, my voice broke. Are you saying he caused the accident? We can't confirm that yet, he said carefully. But it looks suspicious. The car stopped at the scene for a few seconds, then drove away before the paramedics arrived. I pressed a hand against my mouth, trying not to scream. Images flashed through my head. The rain, the screeching tires, the sudden loss of control, and somewhere in that blur of memory, a faint glimpse of headlights in my rearview mirror. It wasn't random. It wasn't fate, it was him. My body began to shake. The detective's voice softened. Mrs. Lawson, I know this is painful, but I need you to understand something. Your testimony, your story, could be crucial. You might be the only person who can expose what really happened. For a long time, I didn't answer. I just stared at the floor, tears dripping silently. How do you process that the man you once shared vows with, in sickness and in health, might have tried to kill you to protect his lies? I had been mourning love, but what I should have been mourning was illusion. After the detective left, I sat on the couch for hours. No movement, no sound, just the ticking of the clock. It was strange. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even feel angry. I felt free, because for the first time, everything made sense. The emotional distance, the affair, the timing of the divorce papers, even his words, it's better this way, and for me, he meant for him, it was better. For his freedom, his image, his money. But what he didn't expect was that the woman he thought was weak, broken, and silenced, would rise. That night, I opened my journal again, the same one I'd written in at the hospital. The pages were already filled with grief and betrayal. But now, I added something new. He used my love to hide his sins. He used my name to fund his greed. He thought my accident was my end. It will be his. I underlined the last sentence. Twice. In the days that followed, I met with the detective again. We went through documents, bank statements, old messages. Piece by piece, we built a case. And with every revelation, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just reclaiming justice. I was reclaiming myself. The woman who had once cried herself to sleep now sat across from law officers, speaking with clarity and strength. The woman who had begged for answers now demanded them. I had spent years being someone's wife, someone's shadow, someone's silence. Now I was becoming my own story. One afternoon, as I left the police station, my phone buzzed. A text, from a number I knew too well. We need to talk. Please, it's not what you think. It was him, David. For a long time I just stared at the screen, At the man who had taken everything and now suddenly wanted words. I typed my reply slowly. "You're right. It's not what I think, it's worse." And then I blocked his number. Because there comes a moment in every broken woman's story when she stops waiting for closure and becomes it herself. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. The same mirror I'd once stared into at the hospital, pale, fragile, unrecognizable. But now, the reflection looking back was different. Older maybe, but stronger. I touched the faint scar on my cheek, the one the accident left behind. It wasn't ugly anymore. It was proof. Proof that I had survived everything he tried to destroy. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Because men like David Lawson don't disappear quietly. They come back, not for love, but for control, for power, for revenge. And I was ready, because I had nothing left to lose. And everything left to expose. When you spend years building a life with someone, you believe you know the map of their soul. Every turn, every storm, every quiet sunrise. But that's the cruelest illusion, isn't it? That love gives you understanding. It doesn't. It just gives you blind faith. And I had plenty of that. When I was lying in the hospital, weak and bruised, recovering from the surgery that was supposed to save my life, my husband, my own husband, was already building a new life with someone else. Her name was Clara. I didn't know it at first, but I could feel her shadow long before I ever learned her name. It started subtly, the way it always does. A changed tone in his voice when he spoke to me, a shorter goodnight, a longer silence at the other end of the phone. You don't need evidence when your heart already feels the betrayal. It starts ringing alarms before your mind dares to believe it. He told me he was busy with work. He told me the business needed him. But when you're married for years, you know when your husband's soul has left the room, even if his body is still sitting beside you. So I asked him once, softly, afraid of the answer. "Is there someone else?" He didn't yell. He didn't deny it either. He just sighed. A deep, exhausted sigh. The kind you make when you've already decided you're done. That silence, that sigh. It was louder than any confession. Clara, she was younger, prettier, energetic. She laughed easily, the kind of laughter I had lost somewhere between raising children, paying bills, and fighting illness. He met her at a charity gala. How ironic, that a night meant for helping others would become the night that destroyed me. I saw her photo months later, on his phone, hidden in the folder he thought I'd never find. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were calculating. I could see it. The hunger of someone who wanted not love, but possession. And she got it, every piece of him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for me. When I received those divorce papers on my hospital bed, it wasn't just the betrayal that broke me, it was the timing. He didn't even wait for me to recover, didn't even pretend to be human long enough to let me heal. I was still hooked to IV drips. My veins carried more medication than hope. And there, beside my bed, was the courier, holding the envelope that ended my marriage. I remember staring at it, the official paper, crisp and emotionless. As if my life, my love, my loyalty, had all been reduced to a few legal paragraphs. The nurse was still adjusting my monitor, and I was signing the death certificate of my marriage. After he left, I kept asking myself one thing. What did she have that I didn't? Was it youth? Was it beauty? Was it laughter that didn't sound tired? But then, one morning, while staring at my reflection in the hospital mirror, pale, fragile, with tubes snaking from my arm, I realized something powerful. It wasn't about her being better. It was about him being weaker. He couldn't handle seeing me sick. He couldn't handle being reminded that love sometimes requires sacrifice. He wanted comfort, not commitment. He wanted excitement, not endurance. And Clara, she was the easy escape. She was a fresh start without the baggage of responsibility. But here's the truth. Men who run from responsibility always find themselves running in circles. I heard stories later, whispers from mutual friends. He and Clara moved in together quickly, too quickly. But love built on betrayal never survives long. I used to imagine them together, her laughter echoing through the house that once held mine, her perfume lingering in the kitchen where I used to cook his favorite meals. But even in those painful daydreams, I noticed something strange. There was no peace in that picture, because deep down, I knew he would never find what he lost in me. Not because I was perfect, but because I was real. Weeks turned into months. The hospital discharged me, but I wasn't the same woman who entered those walls. I left weaker in body, but stronger in spirit, and that strength began to rebuild me. I started therapy. I took long walks, even when every step hurt. I learned to cook for one. I learned to smile without pretending. And for the first time in years, I learned to sleep without waiting for his car to pull into the driveway. Healing didn't come from revenge. It came from rediscovering my own worth. But life, it has a strange sense of timing. Almost a year after the divorce, I ran into Clara. Of all places, at the pharmacy. She was standing in line holding a bottle of anxiety pills. Her hair was messy, her face pale, her eyes tired. She didn't notice me at first, but when she did, her face froze. There was no triumph in her eyes, no smug satisfaction, only exhaustion. And in that moment, I saw the truth. She hadn't won. She had simply inherited a man who didn't know how to love. She tried to speak, stuttered something about how sorry she was, but I just smiled, not with bitterness, with peace. Because finally, I didn't need an apology. I didn't need closure. I had already built that for myself. As I left the pharmacy that day, I realized something profound. Some women spend their whole lives chasing revenge. But true victory, it's walking past your past and not looking back. He sent divorce papers to my hospital bed, but I signed something far greater that day. My freedom. Freedom from the illusion of love that was never truly love. Freedom from the weight of waiting for someone who had already left me emotionally years ago. Freedom from pain that no longer deserved a place in my heart. When I look back now, I don't feel hate, I feel gratitude, because his betrayal gave me something I never had before me. The woman who was once defined by her marriage, her husband, her sacrifices, she's gone. The woman who stands in her place now, she's whole, she's calm, she's unshakable. And that, perhaps, is the greatest revenge of all. They always come back, not because they love you, not because they've changed, but because they finally realize what peace feels like when it's gone. It was almost 2 years after the divorce. 2 long years that had reshaped me from the inside out. I was no longer the woman who cried into her hospital pillow, clutching a ring that had lost its meaning. No, I had learned to laugh again, to build routines, to love silence instead of fearing it. My scars had faded, both on my body and in my soul. And that's exactly when he came back, right when I had stopped needing him. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in the garden, tending to the small patch of roses I'd grown since moving to my little house by the lake. The air smelled of rain and earth. Calm, forgiving. Then, I heard a car pull up, a familiar engine, one that used to mean comfort. Now it made my stomach twist. I looked up, and there he was, my ex-husband. His hair was grayer. His clothes were expensive, but his eyes empty, like someone who'd spent years searching for something he didn't even understand. He hesitated at the gate, as if unsure he was even allowed to breathe near my peace. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost trembling. I could have slammed the door. I could have ignored him. But instead I wiped the dirt from my hands, stood tall, and said calmly, "Talk." He followed me to the porch, looking around like he was trying to recognize a world that no longer included him. He noticed the potted plants, the books stacked by the swing, the calmness in my home, all things that used to irritate him before. "You've changed," he said softly. I smiled. I had to. He sat down, eyes darting everywhere but at me. Finally he spoke. "Clara left." The words came out awkwardly, like a confession he didn't want to admit. I didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't ask why, because deep down, I already knew. Men like him, they always lose the women they chase with deceit. What starts in betrayal ends in destruction. It's an old story, but one they never seem to learn from. I just poured him a glass of water and said, "I'm sorry to hear that." And I was. Not for him, but for her, for the version of her that believed she was different from me. He started talking, words spilling out in broken rhythm. "She changed after a while," he said. "She was jealous, controlling. She said I wasn't enough for her." He paused, looking at me for a flicker of sympathy, but there was none. He continued, "I thought it would be easy to move on. I thought she was what I needed, but she wasn't you." That sentence, "she wasn't you," would have once melted me. Years ago, I would have cried, reached for him, forgiven everything. But now it just sounded small. Because he didn't want me. He wanted the version of me that tolerated his flaws, that kept our life stitched together while he unraveled it. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Can we start over?" It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of every wound he had ever given me. Start over, with the man who sent divorce papers to my hospital bed, with the man who replaced me before my scars had even healed, with the man who thought love was disposable, like yesterday's promises. I took a slow breath. "Why now?" I asked. He stared down at his hands. "I made mistakes," he whispered. "I thought happiness was something I could find in someone else. But it was here, with you. I just didn't see it until it was gone." And there it was. The truth I had waited for once upon a time. But now it didn't move me. Because realization means nothing when it comes too late. I remember leaning back, the cool breeze brushing against my face. "You know," I said softly, "when you left I thought I'd die. I really did. But now I think maybe that was the day I started to live." He looked at me confused. "You don't mean that?" I smiled, not cruelly but with peace. "I do. Because love that breaks you can also rebuild you, if you let it." He dropped his gaze, silent for a while. Then he whispered, "I just want another chance. I've changed." The word tasted bitter in my mouth, because I had changed too, but in ways he could never understand. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes, it means releasing the person who once destroyed you, so they can never destroy you again. I stood up, looking at the man who had once been my world. "Do you know what I remember the most about our last day together?" I asked. He shook his head. "The sound of the hospital monitor beeping beside me when I realized you weren't coming back. That sound stayed in my dreams for months. It was the sound of something dying, not my body, but my belief in you." He looked away, guilt flooding his face. I continued, softly but firmly, "So no, I can't start over. I'm not that woman anymore. And you're not the man I loved." There was silence, heavy, honest silence. He stood up slowly, his voice breaking. "Is there someone else?" I shook my head. "No. There's me. And for the first time in years, that's enough." His shoulders slumped. He nodded, defeated, and began to walk away. As he reached his car, he turned back, his voice trembling. "I hope you find happiness." I smiled sadly. "I already have. And I meant it. Because happiness isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build from the ruins they leave behind." That night, as I sat by the window watching the moonlight reflect on the lake, I realized that closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes, it comes from seeing the person who broke you and realizing they no longer have the power to touch your peace. He left me once when I was too weak to fight. Now he returned when I was too strong to care. And that, I think, was God's poetic justice. They always come back. But not for love, for forgiveness, for familiarity, for the peace they destroyed, because they can't find it anywhere else. And while they search for pieces of the life they ruined, we, the women they left behind, build new ones from the ashes. That's what strength looks like. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Just peace. He walked away from me the second time, slower than before, but this time I didn't watch him leave. I turned back to my roses, touched their petals, and smiled, because the woman he left on a hospital bed no longer existed. In her place stood someone reborn, not from love, but from loss, and she no longer needed saving. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's not something that happens one morning when you wake up feeling generous or healed. No, forgiveness is a slow unraveling, a quiet acceptance that the past can't be rewritten, only understood. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant weakness, that if I forgave him I'd be saying what he did was okay, that I'd be erasing the betrayal, the pain, the lonely nights. But forgiveness isn't approval, it's release. And the day I finally understood that, my heart became lighter than it had been in years. It didn't happen right after he left that day. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no tears, no sudden wave of peace. It began quietly. One morning I was sitting by the lake, sipping tea, watching the reflection of the clouds ripple on the water. The same lake where I'd cried months earlier, wondering why my life had to fall apart so cruelly. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. Just nothing. The ache that used to burn like fire was now only a faint scar, visible, but painless. That's when it hit me, maybe healing isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about remembering without bleeding. I began to think about who I was before everything fell apart. I remembered the girl who dreamed of love stories and happy endings. The woman who gave everything, time, trust, tenderness, to a man who couldn't see her worth. For years, I blamed him for destroying that woman. But the truth, I had destroyed parts of her too. Every time I stayed silent, every time I accepted less than I deserved, every time I mistook endurance for love. So if I was going to forgive him, I had to forgive myself first. For believing in illusions, for holding on when I should have let go, for losing myself in someone else's reflection. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give the person who hurt you. It's the final gift you give to yourself, and that gift began with small acts. I started writing again. Not about him, but about me. My fears, my lessons, my small victories. Each page became a mirror of growth. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from because my marriage demanded isolation disguised as devotion. We laughed, shared stories, and they reminded me that I was more than the pain that defined me. I even started volunteering at the hospital where I once lay helpless. At first, it felt strange walking those halls again. The beeping monitors, the smell of disinfectant, the soft murmurs of patients in pain. But slowly, that place stopped being a symbol of betrayal and became one of rebirth. I was no longer the woman in the hospital bed. I was the one helping others rise from theirs. One afternoon, while helping a patient fill out her forms, I saw something familiar. A divorce document on her lap. Her hands trembled as she tried to sign it. I sat beside her and said softly, "I know that feeling, like you're signing away a part of yourself." She looked at me, eyes wide. "You've been through it." I nodded, and in that moment, without even planning it, I told her my story. Not all the details, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. She cried. Then she smiled. And as I held her hand, I realized something profound. Forgiveness grows fastest when we use our pain to help someone else. Months passed and the seasons changed. Life had become calm, beautifully ordinary. Then one morning I got a letter. From him. It wasn't another apology. Not this time. It was short, almost hesitant. He wrote that he'd moved to another city, that he was in therapy trying to understand himself better, that he didn't expect forgiveness but he hoped I had found peace. I read it twice, then smiled. Not out of love, not out of nostalgia, but out of genuine relief. Because that letter didn't stir my old pain. It confirmed what I already knew. I was free. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. I already had both. Quietly, gently through acceptance. That evening, I walked to the lake again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about the years I had spent fighting with ghosts, trying to make sense of why things happened the way they did, and suddenly, I spoke out loud, not to anyone but to the wind, the water, the universe itself. I forgive you. The words felt strange at first, then lighter, then powerful. I said it again. I forgive you, for leaving me when I needed you most, for choosing someone else, for breaking the woman who loved you more than herself. And then, I added something I hadn't planned. I forgive me, for letting you. The air around me felt still, sacred, like the world had paused for just a heartbeat to listen, and for the first time, I felt whole. Forgiveness didn't mean I wanted him back. It didn't mean what he did was excusable. It meant I refused to carry his mistakes on my shoulders any longer. I think people misunderstand forgiveness. They see it as weakness, when it's the opposite. It's the quiet strength of saying, you no longer control how I feel. I could finally think about him without anger, speak his name without pain, and remember my marriage without bitterness. That was liberation. You see, the day he sent those divorce papers to my hospital bed, that was the day I thought my story ended. But it wasn't. It was just the end of one chapter. The story that followed, the one filled with solitude, rediscovery, and peace, was the story I was meant to write all along. And it took forgiveness to turn the page. Now when I look back, I don't see him as the villain. I see him as the lesson, a painful, necessary teacher who forced me to meet the strongest version of myself. If he hadn't broken me, I wouldn't have rebuilt myself so beautifully. If he hadn't left, I would never have learned to stand alone. If he hadn't betrayed me, I would never have known the depth of my own resilience. So yes, I forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because I do. The night I finally forgave him, I slept with the windows open. The moonlight spilled across my face like a blessing, and in that silence I whispered a promise to myself: no more anger, no more grief, only peace. And I kept it. Now, whenever someone asks me how I survived everything, the betrayal, the loneliness, the heartbreak, I smile and say, I stopped trying to win. I just learned to let go. Because sometimes the greatest victory a woman can have is walking away with her heart intact, her dignity untouched, and her soul finally free. They say love happens when you least expect it. And maybe that's true, but I didn't believe it. Not after everything I'd been through. When you've been shattered by the one you trusted most, love becomes a language you forget how to speak. You start to see it not as a blessing, but as a risk. A storm disguised as sunshine. And for a long time I swore I would never step into that storm again. But life has a gentle way of proving us wrong. It started with something as simple as kindness. There was a small bookstore near the hospital where I volunteered, tucked between a flower shop and a cafe. Every Friday after my shift I'd stop there for tea and a book. It became my little ritual. Quiet, healing, safe. That's where I met Daniel. He was the owner, a man with kind eyes and a voice that sounded like calm itself. Older, like me. A little worn around the edges, like someone who'd seen both love and loss and learned how to live with the echoes. The first time we spoke, it wasn't about anything profound. He simply said, "You always pick the books no one else notices." I smiled. Maybe that's because I've been the kind of person no one noticed for a long time. He laughed. Not the loud, shallow laugh of someone trying to impress you, but the soft kind that feels like understanding. And just like that, a friendship began. Every week, we'd talk a little more. About books, about life, about memories we hadn't shared with anyone in years. He told me about losing his wife to cancer, how he spent 2 years feeling angry at the world, until one day he decided to open the bookstore they had dreamed of together. I told him about my marriage, not in detail, not as a victim story, but as a chapter that shaped me. He listened, never interrupting, never pitying me. Just listening, and somehow, that felt more healing than all the apologies I never got. Sometimes we'd sit in silence reading on opposite sides of the room, our presence enough to fill the emptiness. That's when I realized something beautiful. Love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes, it enters quietly, through shared silences and steady eyes. I didn't notice when my Fridays became my favorite part of the week, or when his messages, simple things like, "New book arrived, I think you'll love it," started making me smile before I even read them. And then one evening, as the rain drummed gently on the windows, he asked, "Do you still believe in love?" The question startled me. I laughed softly. "Believe in it, maybe. Trust it, that's harder." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I think love isn't about trust at first, it's about peace. You start by finding someone whose presence feels safe. Trust grows from that." And I realized that's exactly what I felt with him, safe. Weeks turned into months. Our connection deepened, not through grand gestures but through small consistencies, morning messages, shared meals, warm silences. He never tried to fix me, never asked for more than I was ready to give. He simply stayed. One evening he invited me to a local poetry reading. I hadn't gone anywhere social in years, but something in me wanted to say yes. The poems were about loss, love, and the quiet courage of moving forward. At one point, a woman read a line that stayed with me: "Love after pain is not a second chance. It's a different language." As the audience clapped, Daniel looked at me, really looked. And I knew he understood. We weren't rewriting the past. We were learning a new way to exist in the present. One night as we walked by the lake, the same lake where I once cried for a man who left me, Daniel stopped and said, "You look lighter these days." I smiled. "I think it's because I finally stopped carrying my past." He took my hand, gently, respectfully. Not like a man claiming possession, but like someone offering warmth, and I didn't pull away. Because for the first time in years, the touch didn't remind me of pain. It reminded me of peace. Falling in love again didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, like dawn, one soft ray at a time. He became part of my routine, not because I needed him, but because I chose him. And that made all the difference. I realized love after betrayal is like walking barefoot after stepping on glass. You move carefully, you test the ground. But eventually, you realize the path isn't sharp anymore, it's just familiar. And that's what Daniel gave me: familiarity without fear. There was a moment, small, almost ordinary, that sealed it for me. I had fallen sick with the flu one weekend. Nothing serious, but I was exhausted, alone at home. When I woke up, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood there, holding soup and flowers. He smiled shyly. "You didn't come by the shop, so I figured I'd check in." It was such a simple gesture, nothing grand, nothing rehearsed, but it meant everything. Because years ago I had lain in a hospital bed, waiting for someone who never came, and now someone had come without even being asked. That was love. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that heals. We never labeled what we had. There were no promises, no rush, no pressure. Just understanding. Two people who had learned love the hard way, finally finding it the gentle way. One evening as we watched the sun dip behind the lake, he said quietly, "You know, it's strange. I thought my life ended when my wife died." I looked at him and smiled. "I thought mine ended when my husband left." He nodded, eyes soft. Maybe it didn't end. Maybe it just began differently. And in that moment I understood. We weren't replacements for each other's pasts. We were proof that life gives second chances, just not in the ways we expect. Now, when I think about love, I no longer picture youth or passion or perfection. I picture peace. 2 cups of tea on a rainy day, shared silence that feels like home, a hand that reaches for yours, not to save you but to walk beside you. Daniel showed me that love doesn't have to be loud to be strong. It doesn't have to erase the past. It just has to coexist with it gently. And maybe that's what true love really is: not fireworks, just warmth that stays. Sometimes people ask if I'm afraid to love again, afraid that history might repeat itself. I tell them this: I'm not afraid anymore, because even if it breaks again, I know I'll survive. I've done it before. And I'll do it again. Stronger. Love doesn't guarantee forever, but it gives meaning to the moments that matter. And that's enough for me. So yes, after all the heartbreak, after the hospital, after the divorce papers and the tears, I found love again. Not in the man who broke me, but in the man who reminded me that my heart was still capable of blooming. And this time, I didn't lose myself in love. I found myself in it. I always believed life has a way of testing you. Right when you start to heal, it places your past in front of you, just to see if you've truly moved on. And for me, that test came one cold afternoon when he came back. The same man who sent divorce papers to my hospital bed, the same man who vanished when I needed him most. My ex-husband. It was a quiet Sunday. I had just finished organizing books at the community library where I volunteered. Daniel had gone to pick up some pastries for tea. When I turned around to leave, I froze. There he was, standing near the entrance, looking older, thinner, a shadow of the confident man who once thought I couldn't survive without him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The memories came rushing back like a flood. The hospital room, the envelope on my bedside table, the humiliation of being abandoned when I was fighting for my life. He smiled weakly. He said, as if he were greeting an old friend. I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice not to tremble. He took a step closer. "I've been looking for you." Looking for me. After years of silence, after watching my world collapse while he started a new one with someone else, I looked at him, really looked, and realized something strange. I didn't feel the old ache anymore, no longing, no rage. Just peace. Why? I asked simply. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I made a mistake. A terrible one. I didn't say anything, he continued. I thought I was in love with her. I thought I wanted something new, but it was nothing. She left when things got hard and suddenly, I realized it was you. It was always you. His voice cracked. And once upon a time, those words would have broken me. But now they didn't touch me at all. I was sick, I said quietly. You sent divorce papers to my hospital bed. He winced. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I shook my head. No, you didn't panic. You decided. He looked down, ashamed. I know. And I've paid for it every day since. For a brief second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered every lonely night, every moment I stared at the ceiling wondering why I wasn't enough. And that pity turned into strength. He tried again. I just want a chance to make things right. I've changed. I smiled sadly. People don't change because they regret losing someone. They change because they regret who they became. He blinked, caught off guard. I continued, my voice steady. When you walked away, you didn't just end a marriage. You ended a chapter of me that believed love had to hurt. And I'm grateful for that now. Because your betrayal taught me what real love should never feel like. He looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know how strong you were until I saw what you became without me. Exactly, I said. You saw what I became without you. And that's how I know I don't need you. There was silence between us, heavy, final, honest. He tried one last time. Can we at least talk? Have dinner? Just two. I interrupted gently. Closure doesn't come from revisiting the wound. It comes from realizing it doesn't bleed anymore. He lowered his eyes. For the first time, he looked small. And then, as if the universe wanted to draw the last line in our story, Daniel walked in, holding 2 paper bags of pastries, smiling. When he saw my ex, he hesitated, sensing the tension immediately. I turned to Daniel and smiled warmly. It's okay. We were just finishing up. My ex looked between us, his expression tightening. So this is him? Yes, I said softly. This is Daniel, the man who didn't run when I was broken, the man who doesn't need to hurt me to feel powerful. I could see the words hit him like a storm. He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. Don't. Just go. There's nothing left to fix. Not because I hate you, but because I've finally forgiven you. And forgiveness means letting go completely. He stood there, silent, for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow, resigned, and walked away. As he disappeared down the street, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not revenge, just release. For years I had dreamed of that moment, what I would say if I ever saw him again. I imagined shouting, crying, demanding answers. But in reality, all I needed to do was stand tall. Because healing isn't about proving the other person wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you no longer need their apology to move forward. That evening, Daniel and I sat by the window, sipping tea. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just took my hand and said, "You did well?" I smiled. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. "And now that you have?" he asked gently. I looked out at the darkening sky. I feel free. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how strange life is. The same man who once shattered me had unknowingly helped rebuild me. Not by returning, but by leaving. If he hadn't walked away, I never would have learned to walk alone. If he hadn't abandoned me in that hospital, I never would have found my strength to survive. If he hadn't broken my heart, I never would have opened it again, to someone who truly deserved it. Sometimes, the worst thing someone does to you becomes the best thing that ever happened. Because it pushes you toward the version of yourself you were meant to be all along. Months later, I heard he had moved to another city, remarried again, perhaps. But by then it didn't matter. His name no longer had power over me. His memory no longer dictated my peace. I had reclaimed my story. And in that reclamation, I found something far greater than revenge or closure. I found freedom. Now, when I look back at that hospital bed, at the woman who once lay there weak and abandoned, I wish I could whisper to her, "You will stand again. You will love again. And one day, the man who broke you will stand before you. Not as your nightmare, but as your lesson." Because that's exactly what happened. He was my greatest heartbreak. But he also became the chapter that ended so my real life could begin. And that's the truth about healing. It doesn't mean you forget the past. It means the past no longer controls how you love, how you hope, or how you see yourself. When my ex-husband came back, he didn't find the broken woman he left. He found the woman I became because he left. And that, I realized, was the most poetic justice of all. There's something extraordinary about reaching the end of a storm and realizing you survived it, not just barely, but beautifully. When I look back now, I sometimes can't believe that woman in the hospital bed was me. Fragile, frightened, holding on to the last shreds of hope, waiting for someone who never came. But that woman, she's the reason I stand tall today. She's the reason I found my voice again, my worth again, myself again. I used to think strength was about never breaking. Now I know. Real strength is breaking, and still finding the courage to rebuild. There was a time when I couldn't even say his name without feeling pain twist inside me. Now, his memory doesn't make me flinch, it makes me grateful. Because he taught me the hardest, most beautiful lesson of all, that losing someone who doesn't value you is not a tragedy. It's a gift. In the months after that final encounter, I began to see my life through new eyes. Not as a series of losses, but as a journey back to myself. I moved into a small house near the lake, the same lake where I once cried for him, but now it's my sanctuary. I planted flowers in the garden, painted the porch, filled the walls with laughter and warmth. It's funny how healing isn't loud or dramatic, it's quiet. It's in the morning coffee that tastes a little sweeter, in the sunlight that hits your face differently when you're no longer waiting for someone to love you right. Daniel and I were still together. But what makes it beautiful is that it's not about dependence, it's about companionship. Two whole people choosing each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. There's no fear in it, no begging, no pretending. Just peace, just kindness, just love in its gentlest form. He often says, "You're the calm after my storm." But I tell him, "No, Daniel, I am my own calm. You just share it with me." Sometimes, when I talk to other women, at the library or the hospital where I still volunteer, I see that same lost look I once wore. The look of someone who's been betrayed. Someone who's trying to smile through the wreckage. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You are not what was done to you. You are what you rise from. Because pain will visit us all. But it doesn't get to define us. It doesn't get to decide how our story ends. I think of the night I signed those divorce papers. I remember the trembling of my hands, the tears that blurred the ink. At the time, I thought I was signing away my life. But now I know. I was signing my rebirth. That paper wasn't an ending. It was a beginning disguised as heartbreak. I lost a husband that day, but I found a woman. And she was far stronger, wiser, and more alive than I ever knew she could be. If you had told me years ago that I'd thank him one day, I would have laughed bitterly. But now, I truly do. Thank you for leaving me when I needed you most. Because that's when I learned to be my own savior. Thank you for choosing someone else. Because it forced me to choose myself. Thank you for teaching me what love isn't. Because that's how I learned what love is. I stopped being angry at him long ago. Because forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you to unclench your heart and make room for peace. And oh, what peace I have now. I wake up every morning to a quiet home filled with sunlight and soft music. I brew my tea, open my journal, and write, not to escape anymore, but to remember, to honor the woman I've become. Sometimes, Daniel joins me, reading quietly beside me. Other times, I just sit alone and smile, at the life I built from the ruins. I used to be ashamed of my story. Now I wear it like armor. Because the truth is, there's power in survival. There's beauty in scars. And there's freedom in knowing that nothing, not betrayal, not abandonment, not even heartbreak, can destroy a soul that chooses to heal. Every now and then I visit the hospital, the same one where it all began. I walk through those corridors, not as a patient now, but as a volunteer. I hold hands with women who feel forgotten. I tell them, I was you once, but one day, you'll be me, standing tall, smiling again, stronger than you ever thought possible. And when they look at me with tearful eyes, I see something magical, hope, the same hope I thought I'd lost forever. That's when I realize my story wasn't meant to end in pain. It was meant to begin there, so I could help others find their way out too. Life didn't turn out how I imagined it. It turned out better, not perfect, but peaceful. And peace, I've learned, is far more precious than perfection. There are still days I feel lonely or remember the ache. But now I know loneliness isn't emptiness. It's space, space that I can fill with new dreams, new love, new beginnings. Because the woman I am now doesn't chase love. She attracts peace. She doesn't beg for closure. She creates it. She doesn't wait to be saved. She saves herself. So, who am I now? I am the woman who was sent divorce papers to her hospital bed and lived to tell the story with grace. I am the woman who was once broken and now helps others heal. I am the woman who lost everything and found herself. If you ever find yourself lying in your own version of that hospital bed, abandoned, forgotten, betrayed, I want you to remember this: you will not stay there forever. You will rise. You will rebuild. You will love again, not because someone comes back, but because you come back to yourself. My story isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth. It's about the quiet miracle of surviving what was meant to destroy you. And maybe one day, someone will hear my story and whisper, If she could survive that, maybe I can too. That's all the legacy I need, because in the end, I didn't just survive my heartbreak, I transformed through it. When I close my eyes now, I don't see that hospital bed anymore. I see sunlight. I see my garden. I see the reflection of a woman who finally loves her own company. And that is my happy ending.